It was a calm, chilly morning when Father Antonio, a man with a serene countenance and a generous heart, began to notice something unusual in his peaceful routine. A resident of a small, welcoming village, he had already dedicated over 3 decades of his life to this beloved community. Always dressed in his simple, worn cassock and with a wooden cross on his chest, Father Antonio was loved by all. To the villagers, he was not just a spiritual leader, but a friend, a confidant, someone they could turn to for advice and words of comfort. In times of need, he offered shelter, support, and hope to those who sought him out. However, in recent times, something different had crept into his life. The vibrant joy that used to light up his eyes was fading, replaced by a sadness he tried to conceal. Few knew, but Father Antonio was grappling with a loss that had shaken him deeply. His younger brother, also a priest and his longtime companion on his journey of faith, had passed away suddenly. Since then, he carried an emptiness that even prayer could not entirely fill. It was amidst this grief that something curious began to happen. A mysterious and imposing bird, an owl with piercing eyes, started to follow him everywhere. Whenever he walked down the cobbled streets, it flew overhead or perched on a nearby tree, as if watching his every step attentively. At first, the priest thought it was merely coincidence, but weeks went by, and the bird remained, silent and enigmatic. This owl was no ordinary creature, and its fixed gaze seemed to pierce the priest's soul, creating in him a growing unease. Until one day, after an evening mass, he gathered the courage to take a closer look at the mysterious visitor. In a moment of revelation, something inexplicable filled his heart. The reason why the bird followed him every day came to light in a surprising way, and what he discovered made him tremble. Something troubled Father Antonio's heart, but he kept these worries in silence. He believed his role was to be strong for others, a pillar of stability and faith. Yet inside, he bore the weight of his own doubts and anxieties. On lonely nights, he would find himself walking in search of some solace, and it was during one of these nocturnal walks that something unexpected happened. It was a quiet, clear night. The sky appeared like a dark blanket dotted with glimmering stars. The priest followed a narrow, isolated path leading to an abandoned chapel atop a hill. The silence was absolute until suddenly, the soft flapping of wings broke the serenity around him. He looked up, and on the branch of a nearby tree he saw an enigmatic figure, an owl with white feathers and deep, penetrating eyes. It observed him with a calmness that left him unsettled. "It's just a bird," he thought, trying to brush off any strange thoughts. Yet something in that creature's presence left him uneasy. In the days that followed, the owl kept appearing. No matter where he went, the bird was always there. During his routine visits to the faithful, there it was, moving from branch to branch, silently accompanying him. Even during Mass, he would see it perched in the church's bell tower, watching intently as if it were a silent guardian. The owl's presence became so constant that, as the weeks passed, Father Antonio could no longer ignore it. It seemed to know exactly where he was going, as if it was always one step ahead. Initially skeptical, the priest began to question, what did that bird want? Why was it following him so closely? With each appearance, his curiosity grew, but so did an underlying unease. One night, upon returning to the church after visiting a grieving family, he entered the altar, weary and lost in thought. And to his astonishment, there was the owl once more. This time, however, it was closer than ever, its eyes fixed on the priest, almost as if it wished to reveal something to him. Deep within his heart, something told him that this presence was no coincidence, and the mystery behind why the owl kept coming to him only grew more unsettling. The owl was there, perched on the stained glass window, bathed in the soft glow of the candles, as if it were part of that sacred place. Exhausted, emotionally drained, Father Antonio knelt before the altar, seeking some relief. In a moment of total surrender, he prayed aloud, almost as if in confession, "Lord, if this bird is a sign, please enlighten my heart. I feel lost and don't know which path to follow. I have led your flock, but my own soul is confused." He looked up, gazing at the owl that watched him in an almost reverent silence, and continued, "Show me the purpose of this creature. I feel there is something I need to understand, but I can't see it." As the words left his lips, the priest experienced a whirlwind of emotions. There was a trace of fear in his heart, yet at the same time, an unusual sense of peace. It was as if the owl was there to reveal something that was still beyond his comprehension. The days passed, but the owl did not leave him. Each morning, It accompanied him on his solitary walks. With each visit he made to the faithful, there it was, always nearby, like a silent guardian. The villagers began to notice and comment on the bird that seemed to follow Father Antonio. For some, it was a divine sign. For others, merely coincidence. But to the priest it was becoming something far more profound. He sensed an uncommon intelligence in those eyes, something that went beyond mere animal instinct. On a Sunday morning during Mass, Father Antonio preached about the importance of faith in times of uncertainty. In a moment of pure solemnity and silence, the owl positioned itself atop the cross above the altar, drawing everyone's gaze. The congregation, surprised, fixed their attention on it. It was as if that creature were a messenger, carrying a yet-to-be-unveiled secret, yearning to be understood. A deep silence took over the church, and Father Antonio paused his sermon, his eyes fixed on the owl. A wave of emotion swept over him, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and reverence. That owl, perched so regally, seemed to have a purpose there, something that transcended mere chance. He knew it was not present for any trivial reason, but for a reason that eluded his understanding. What could this mysterious purpose be? Days passed, and as the weeks went by, the silent bond between the priest and the owl only deepened. It was no ordinary connection, nothing akin to friendship or any human relationship. There were no touches, gestures, or words. It was a mute presence, but one that touched the depths of his soul. He felt the owl was there to reveal something to him, but what? In each prayer he presented himself before God and asked for clarity. Lord, if this creature is a sign, may your light show me the way, may it allow me to understand what I need to learn. The bird's presence, while moving him, also heightened his restlessness. With each visit from that mysterious animal, his anxiety grew, as did his curiosity about what this phenomenon could mean. To Father Antonio, the owl seemed to be a test of faith, a trial of his patience and devotion, perhaps a reminder of something he had not yet fully understood on his spiritual journey. Or perhaps it was somehow connected to his pain, to the recent loss of his beloved brother. That loss still weighed heavily on his heart, and he wondered if the owl's presence was a link to the past, a way for his brother to communicate something that was still unclear. With each passing day, the mystery and tension surrounding the owl grew. He felt that something was about to be revealed, a deep and transformative truth awaiting the right moment to come forth. And he knew that when this answer finally arrived, his life would take a path he had never imagined. Even without answers, Father Antonio's routine continued. The owl's presence, which initially sparked only curiosity, had now become an inseparable part of his daily life. Each morning, there it was, waiting for him somewhere along his path. With each visit he made, the owl followed, attentive and tireless. He still did not understand the meaning of it all, but he felt a sense of a greater purpose each time he saw it. He knew this phenomenon was no mere coincidence. And every time the owl drew near, his heart beat faster, as if something was on the verge of being revealed. It seemed to carry a secret longing to be uncovered, something perhaps older than he could comprehend. In his moments of prayer or during his solitary walks, a strange connection between Father Antonio and the owl seemed to grow in an inexplicable way, as if a silent bond were forming between them. One day, after a particularly difficult Mass, the priest felt compelled to visit a small, abandoned chapel on the outskirts of the village. This chapel held special meaning for him and his late brother. It was the place where, as young priests, they had often prayed and reflected on the future of the church and the community. But since his brother's passing, Antonio had avoided the place, fearing the weight of memories and the sorrow it brought. Still, on that day, something stronger called him. He felt he needed to confront the deeper feelings within his heart, and perhaps the answer to his questions lay there, in that sacred yet forgotten place. As he walked toward the chapel, he noticed that the owl, as always, was following him, flying from tree to tree, silent but watchful. This presence, in some way, comforted him, as if the bird were a guardian, protecting him from an even greater sorrow. When he finally arrived, he found the chapel just as he remembered it. Quiet, with the floor covered in dry leaves and the structure worn by time. Yet, despite its abandonment, there was something sacred in that space, an energy that seemed to pulse, as if the ancient prayers whispered over the years still echoed within the walls. Father Antonio entered, approached the worn altar, and with a heavy heart, knelt. In silence he began to pray. Once again the owl perched, this time on the chapel's window, watching him with its deep, penetrating eyes. Feeling the intense gaze of the bird, a strange sensation ran through him. It was as if something was about to be revealed, something he could not yet grasp but that seemed to be waiting for this very moment to emerge. "Why do you follow me?" Father Antonio whispered, as if the owl could actually answer him. Yet in the midst of his prayer, a strange sound interrupted his words. It wasn't the owl, but something coming from outside the chapel. A faint cry, almost imperceptible, but filled with a pain that made him shudder. The priest promptly rose and, still under the watchful gaze of the owl, headed for the door. Following the sound, he walked to the back of the chapel, where there was a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees. When he arrived, what he found left him speechless. Sitting on the ground, among the shadows of the trees, was a small child, no older than 5 or 6, wrapped in an old tattered blanket. Her face was dirty, her eyes red from crying, and her body shivered from the cold. It was a little girl, dirty and frightened, who seemed to have been lost for days. Overcome with a wave of compassion, Father Antonio knelt beside her. "It's all right," he said in a soft, reassuring tone. "I'm here. I'll help you." Hearing the priest's calm voice, the girl stopped crying for a moment and looked at him with eyes that held a mix of fear and sadness. She seemed to have wandered aimlessly, not knowing where she was or what to do. The priest, with all his gentleness, removed his cloak and wrapped it around her, warming her with kindness. Then he began to guide her back to the chapel where he could care for her properly. As he and the child walked, the owl, which had been watching from a distance, flew and perched on one of the nearby trees as if supervising each step. Father Antonio couldn't help but notice the moment when the girl's eyes met the owl's. There was something there, a mysterious spark that seemed to connect the three in a profound and inexplicable way. Inside the chapel, the priest lit a small candle, casting a gentle light across the sacred space, and sat beside the girl. Tenderly, he offered her a piece of bread he had with him and a bit of water. Gradually, the girl began to relax. Her name was Sophia, and between sobs and pauses, she managed to tell him that she had gotten separated from her family during a walk in the woods. She had been trying to find her way back for days, without success. With a warm smile, Father Antonio looked into her eyes and said, "Don't worry anymore, Sophia. I'll take you back to the village, and soon you'll be with your family again." As he comforted her with words of hope, the owl remained close to the chapel's entrance, as if standing guard, protecting this unexpected and meaningful moment. And then, an overwhelming thought invaded the priest's heart. The owl hadn't simply been following him. It had guided him to Sophia, as if it knew he needed to find her. With Sophia asleep in his arms, Father Antonio looked at the owl, which observed him with an almost mystical serenity, and he felt a wave of deep gratitude. Perhaps that bird had a higher, more spiritual purpose than he had ever imagined. In that moment, the mystery of the owl began to unfold before his eyes, revealing a greater mission, one that gave new meaning to the journey of faith he had been walking. Perhaps in that moment when Father Antonio found himself lost and without direction, the owl was there to remind him that, even in the darkest hours, there is always a way back to the light. It seemed to want to show him that, as a shepherd of souls, his mission was to remain attuned to the needs of others, even when he himself felt vulnerable and forsaken. That night, as he led Sophia back to the village and witnessed her reunion with her family, the priest felt something different stir in his heart. The pain of his brother's loss was still present, like a wound that had not yet fully healed. However, the feeling of being adrift, without purpose, began to give way to a sense of clarity. It was as if he finally understood that his mission extended beyond his own sorrows and uncertainties. He now realized that in some mysterious way, the owl had become a silent guide, leading him to understand a greater truth. When his eyes met the owl's once more, he saw that its gaze, once enigmatic, now felt more welcoming, almost familiar. The bird that had followed him for so long was not merely a mysterious presence. It was like an old friend, a silent companion who had helped him uncover something profound about himself and his mission. Father Antonio understood then that life was made up of mysteries he would never completely understand, but also of divine signs that show us the way, even in the most challenging moments. Returning to the village, the priest felt changed. He had brought Sophia back into the arms of her family, but, in a way, he had also been led to a new understanding of his purpose. In the days that followed, as he returned to his routine at the parish, he felt that he carried within him a renewed sense of meaning. The encounter with Sophia and the constant presence of the owl not only made him reflect on his role as a priest, but also on his own humanity and the need to seek solace and guidance in divine mysteries. Father Antonio felt touched by that moment, knowing that each silent look from the owl and each step beside Sophia were woven together with a purpose he was only beginning to grasp. What once seemed a mystery was now transforming into a symbol of something greater, something Father Antonio could not fully explain but felt deeply within his soul. In the days that followed, the owl's presence grew even stronger. It no longer just accompanied him during Mass or on his walks, but now remained constantly around his residence, like a sentinel, watching over him protectively. Father Antonio, who had once been merely intrigued by the bird, now began to accept it as a sign that his life was connected to something beyond his understanding. It wasn't long before the parishioners noticed the owl's constant presence, and some even began to refer to it as the angel in the form of a bird that accompanied the priest. One morning, as Father Antonio was preparing for Mass, an unexpected visitor knocked at his door. It was a weary-looking woman, perhaps around 50, her face marked by suffering and her eyes brimming with tears. She introduced herself as Donna Carmen and explained that she had come from a distant village in search of comfort. "Father, I have been carrying a heavy burden in my heart for weeks. I need your help," she said, her voice trembling and choked with pain. Always willing to listen and help, Father Antonio invited her to sit and share what was troubling her. Donna Carmen, with a distant gaze and a voice heavy with sorrow, began to tell her story. About a year ago, she had lost her only son, João, a kind young man loved by everyone in their village. In a tragic accident, he had left suddenly on a day like any other, leaving in his mother an immeasurable void and a pain that seemed never to fade. Slowly, as Donna Carmen poured out her heart, the priest felt that this encounter was no coincidence. "He was my pride, Father. He was all I had," Donna Carmen shared, wiping her tears with a crumpled tissue. "But since he's gone, I feel I've lost my way. My heart is broken, and the pain is too great. It's as if he's still here, and yet so far away." Father Antonio listened intently to every word, reflecting silently on his own losses and the inner battles he had been facing. He understood, now more than ever, that Donna Carmen's suffering was something he too carried, though in a different way. As he listened to the story of this grieving mother, he felt a deep connection forming between them, for her grief brought to the surface the very wounds he bore from the loss of his brother, wounds that had not yet fully healed. It was as if Carmen's sorrow made him revisit the pain he had long buried within. "Donna Carmen," he began, his voice gentle and filled with compassion. "The path of grief is a difficult journey. Often it feels as though we walk alone in darkness, but know that we are never truly alone. God walks with us every step of the way, even in moments when we cannot feel his presence." As he spoke, Father Antonio's gaze drifted to the window, where the owl observed him, perched on a nearby branch, its eyes penetrating and serene. Somehow he knew that the owl's presence was connected to this moment. It was there as a reminder that despite all the pain, there is always something or someone watching over us, guiding us along the way, even through the darkest passages. Donna Carmen, still emotional, looked at the priest with a newfound glimmer of hope. "I want to believe, Father, but sometimes it's so hard." Donna Carmen hesitated for a moment, as if struggling with her own words, and then added, "Before my son passed, he loved animals. We had an owl at home, and it would always accompany him wherever he went. Since his death, I haven't seen the owl. It's as if it left with him. When I saw this owl here at the church, I felt as though João was trying to send me a message." A shiver ran through Father Antonio. The revelation surprised him, and something inside him made him realize that the connection between himself, the owl, and Donna Carmen was far more profound than mere coincidence. The young man who had passed so tragically also had a special bond with the very bird that now accompanied the priest. He wondered if the owl could be a symbol, a representation of the young man's spirit, or perhaps something even greater, attempting to comfort the wounded hearts he had left behind. "Perhaps this owl is a message," Father Antonio said, his voice steadier now, but filled with hope. "A message that your son is still with you in spirit, that somehow he wants to show you that, even in physical absence, love remains. He continues to guide and protect us." Donna Carmen's eyes filled with tears, but this time they held a glow of peace, as if she had finally found a bit of relief after so much suffering. That night, as Father Antonio reflected on the events of the day, he was visited by an intense dream. In his vision, he was walking through a dense forest alone, following an unknown path. The owl was close by, flying between the trees, but this time, it seemed to be leading him somewhere specific, to a destination he did not yet know, but sensed was part of something greater. Suddenly, among the dark trees in the forest of his dream, Father Antonio saw a gentle light, like a distant beacon. As he drew closer, he could make out two figures that were immensely familiar to him. His brother, standing beside João, Dona Carmen's son. Both of them looked at him with expressions of peace, as if they were at rest. The owl, which had always accompanied him, perched on João's shoulder. The young man looked at the priest in silence, but his eyes conveyed a clear and comforting message. "We are always with you." Father Antonio awoke with his heart racing, yet strangely at peace, with a profound sense of understanding. He knew that this dream was more than a simple creation of the mind. It was a true sign, a confirmation that those who depart never truly leave us. The spirits of his brother and João were present not only in his memories, but also in the signs and symbols around him, in the constant presence of the owl that still followed him. Now, with this new understanding, Father Antonio felt more determined than ever to continue his life's mission. His purpose renewed itself with every moment, especially as he thought of people like Dona Carmen who sought comfort and healing for their wounds. That morning, he awoke with a feeling of renewal, the dream still fresh in his mind, where he had encountered his brother and João, Dona Carmen's son. For the first time in many years, he felt he had found a greater purpose for the suffering he carried. The owl, which had once only intrigued him, now seemed to be a true messenger, a symbol of something divine guiding him toward understanding. He realized that comfort and healing were not only for him, but also for all those who crossed his path. As he prepared the altar for the morning mass, he reflected on how much had changed since the beginning of his journey with the owl. The sorrow of his brother's loss still lingered, but now he understood that even in pain, there was a greater purpose, a call to move forward, bringing hope and peace to those in need. Now, instead of feeling an open wound, Father Antonio saw his grief as a scar, something that was part of him but no longer hindered him from moving forward. Dona Carmen also continued to visit the parish, and with each encounter, she seemed a little more at peace. The constant presence of the owl, now seen by everyone as a symbol of protection and love, brought her unexpected solace. Though no words could ever fully erase the pain of losing a child, Dona Carmen felt that João's spirit remained close, guided by the mysterious presence of the bird. One afternoon, just after Mass, she approached Father Antonio with a new light in her eyes. "Father, something incredible happened," she said, with a mix of surprise and relief in her voice. "I dreamed of João, and in the dream he was smiling. He seemed so at peace. He told me that everything was all right, and that I didn't need to worry anymore because he was in a place of light. And in the dream, the owl was there too, flying beside him." Dona Carmen's words touched Father Antonio deeply. He knew that dreams were often how our souls tried to connect with the spiritual world, and it seemed that in some way, the owl continued to play an essential role in this process of healing. Looking at Dona Carmen, he said tenderly, "I believe João was trying to tell you that you are never alone." Father Antonio responded with a warm smile. "And the love you share transcends time and space. He will always be with you, in one way or another." Dona Carmen smiled, and for the first time since losing her son, she seemed truly at peace. The owl, perched on a nearby branch, let out a soft hoot, as if it were joining in the conversation, a subtle echo of understanding and support. That owl was no longer merely a silent follower, but had now become a true spiritual companion, a bridge between two worlds. As the weeks passed, Father Antonio began to notice something extraordinary. It wasn't only Dona Carmen who found comfort in the owl's presence. Other parishioners also started seeing the bird as a symbol of hope and renewal. People who carried their own grief and sorrows began to see in the owl a message of comfort, something that brought new meaning to life. Gradually, the small church transformed into a spiritual refuge, where those seeking peace and solace came not only for faith but also for the enigmatic and comforting presence of the owl, which seemed always to be there, like a silent guardian. One day, while walking through the woods near the church, Father Antonio was surprised by an unexpected visit. A group of young people from a neighboring village had organized a pilgrimage to the parish, drawn by the stories circulating about the owl. Among them, a young man named Thomas approached the priest, his eyes filled with curiosity and hope. "Father, I heard about the owl that follows you, and how it has helped people find peace. I recently lost my father, and since then, I feel like something is missing inside me, as if a part of me is empty. Do you think the owl could help me find answers? Thomas asked, his voice trembling, trying to hold back emotions that threatened to surface. Father Antonio looked into Thomas's eyes and saw the same deep pain he had encountered in Donna Carmen and in so many others who sought comfort at the parish. He knew the owl itself wasn't the source of the answers, but rather what it represented, a connection to something far greater, a bridge to the spiritual world, and a quiet hope that seemed distant to many. The owl, Thomas, is a symbol, Father Antonio began, his voice calm and steady. It reminds us that even when the pain feels unbearable, we are not alone on our journey. There is something or someone watching over us, even if we cannot see it. He paused, allowing his words to sink into the young man's mind. What you seek isn't in the owl itself, but within you. And if you allow it, the owl can be your guide, a reminder that love and light continue, even when we lose those we love. Thomas listened in silence, absorbing every word from the priest. He felt something different, a small spark of hope igniting within him. And then, as if understanding the importance of the moment, the owl appeared, perched on a nearby branch, its deep, intense eyes fixed on Thomas, as if silently conveying a message. Surprised, the young man smiled for the first time in a long while, feeling a wave of peace and comfort he hadn't experienced in ages. The presence of that bird somehow brought the solace he had been seeking. From that day on, Father Antonio began to see the owl differently. The bird was no longer just a divine mystery. It had become a true symbol of resilience, hope, and renewal for all those who sought peace at his parish. The small church, which had once seemed an ordinary place, was now seen as a refuge where souls in search of healing found not only the comfort of faith, but also the inspiring presence of that owl, which seemed to understand and accompany every suffering heart. At the same time, Father Antonio continued his own journey of growth and healing. The presence of the owl and the support it offered to the faithful mirrored his own process of healing. He had lost someone dear, but he realized that by helping others find peace, he also found strength to cope with his own pain. The sorrow over his brother's loss now felt lighter, more bearable to Father Antonio. He had learned through the presence of the mysterious bird and the people he encountered along the way that love, faith, and spiritual connection transcend any earthly suffering. Now he looked to the future with fresh eyes, understanding that the owl would not be with him forever, but its presence, while it lasted, would be a constant reminder that life is full of mysteries but also of miracles. Thus, the little church and its priest, now known as the priest with the owl, became a beacon of hope for all those seeking comfort and healing. Even when the owl was not visible, its presence could be felt, like a gentle breeze that caresses the face, reminding everyone that amidst the pain, there is always hope. As weeks passed, the owl became an essential part of daily life for the small community. Silently, it followed Father Antonio, perching nearby during Mass, accompanying him in his moments of prayer, and even during his visits to the homes of grieving families. Its presence had become a symbol of healing and comfort, but there was a sense in the air that something grand was about to happen. One afternoon, Father Antonio received an unexpected letter. It was from a distant diocese, inviting him to participate in a spiritual retreat for priests who had experienced personal loss. At first, he hesitated. The idea of leaving his parish and the community that depended so much on him seemed unsettling. Moreover, how could he leave the owl behind, which seemed so inexplicably connected to him? Yet, after days of reflection and prayer, Father Antonio understood that accepting the invitation was the right decision. He needed this time for himself, to fully heal the wounds of his past, and perhaps to better understand the spiritual connection he shared with the owl. During Sunday Mass, he announced his temporary departure to the congregation, promising that he would return soon. The community, shaken by the news, accepted his decision with understanding, recognizing that even the priest needed rest and renewal. That very night, however, something unexpected happened. As Father Antonio was organizing his few belongings for the trip, he heard the familiar sound of wings. But this time the owl, which had always accompanied him from a distance, flew through his window. It perched on the balcony railing, watching him intently with its large, deep eyes, as if aware that something important was about to happen. Surprised, Father Antonio sat beside the window and, with a sigh, began speaking directly to the bird, something he had never done before. "What are you here to show me?" he asked in a low voice, feeling an intense and inexplicable connection. "I feel there's something greater here, something I don't yet fully understand." Of course, the owl didn't respond, but remained there in silence, as if waiting, watching him with a vigilant gaze. Then, suddenly, it took flight, disappearing through the window into the night. Father Antonio felt a growing restlessness in his chest. Without a second thought, he grabbed his coat and headed into the woods. The night was enveloped in an almost unsettling silence, and he walked guided only by faith and the invisible presence of the owl. The full moon cast a pale light along the path, illuminating it just enough for him to keep moving forward. The soft sound of leaves beneath his feet was the only noise filling the cold night air. He pressed on until, at a certain point, a familiar sensation enveloped him. There was the owl, perched high on a branch, watching him closely. Father Antonio paused, looking around, feeling the air charged with something indefinable, almost sacred. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the woods, a cry, but not just any cry. It was a deep, desperate moan, the sound of someone steeped in immeasurable pain. His heart quickened, and he ran toward the sound. Upon reaching a small clearing, he saw a young woman kneeling on the ground, sobbing as she clutched a small wooden cross. She was alone, lost in her sorrow. The owl, perched on a branch above, observed the scene with its penetrating eyes, as if it understood the immense significance of the moment. Father Antonio approached cautiously, kneeling beside the young woman. "Are you all right?" he asked in a soft, compassionate tone. The young woman lifted her tear-streaked face and looked at him with a desperate gaze. "I lost my son," she murmured between sobs. "He died a few months ago, and I can't find peace. I come here every night trying to feel his presence, but all I feel is emptiness," she said, her voice breaking with grief. Father Antonio felt a pang in his heart. The woman's pain was palpable, like an open wound, and he knew instantly that he was there for a greater reason. He looked up at the owl, which continued to watch them, and felt a wave of understanding wash over him. "I also lost someone dear," he replied, his voice slightly trembling. "My brother. For many years I carried that pain alone, believing there was no hope, that his absence would always be an unbearable burden. But over time, I learned that the love of those who leave us never disappears. They are still with us in spirit, in ways we often cannot fully understand." The young woman looked at him with pleading eyes, seeking comfort in every word. "But how do you cope? How do you find peace?" she asked, her voice heavy with anguish. Father Antonio took a deep breath, and in that brief moment, he felt his brother's presence beside him, as if silently accompanying him. A gentle smile formed on his lips. "Sometimes peace comes in unexpected ways," he murmured. "Like this owl," he continued, looking at the bird that remained watchful. "It came into my life when I needed a sign, a reminder that there's something greater than pain, something beyond this world. I can't fully explain it, but I feel it's here to remind us that there is light, even in the deepest darkness." The young woman turned her gaze toward the owl, and for a brief moment something in her face changed. Her crying ceased, and a faint sigh of relief escaped her lips, as if the mere presence of the bird and Father Antonio's words had ignited a small spark of hope in her heart. She held the small cross in her hands and lifted her eyes to the starry sky, feeling, perhaps for the first time in months, that she was not alone. The owl let out a soft hoot, as if blessing that moment of connection and healing. Father Antonio knew that this was the turning point. He finally understood the true purpose of his journey alongside the owl. It wasn't just about his own healing, but about helping others find solace in their losses. The owl was a silent messenger, guiding him not only physically but spiritually, connecting him with those who most needed his support. The following morning, when the priest returned to the parish, he felt different. The clarity he had long sought was now within his reach. He realized then that his mission was not just to preach, but to be a guide for those who, like him, had lost something important. And the owl was still there, faithful as ever, reminding him that even in the darkest nights there is always hope. With a renewed sense of purpose, Father Antonio returned to his parish, transformed. In the weeks that followed, the community noticed that his homilies carried an even greater depth. He spoke of hope, healing, and the power of love with a sincerity that touched every soul present. The owl continued to follow him, but now, more than ever, it symbolized something grand, a spiritual bond that transcended ordinary understanding, uniting the priest and his community in a new light of hope and renewal. The story of the owl that followed the priest spread through the town and soon reached distant places. People from faraway villages began to travel to hear Father Antonio's words and, in some way, to see the owl, which always seemed to be nearby, as if guarding something sacred. The owl became a symbol for all who arrived seeking comfort. For many, it represented the spirit of those who had departed, but who continued to guide and protect them. One morning, as he prepared for another Mass, Father Antonio found a letter on his desk. It was from the young woman he had met in the forest clearing, the one grieving her lost son. In the letter, she shared how that encounter had changed her life. With the priest's counsel and the almost mystical presence of the owl, she had finally found the strength to move forward, honoring her son's memory with love rather than pain. Now, she dedicated her time to helping other mothers who had experienced similar losses. Moved, Father Antonio felt tears well up as he read the letter. He knew that his mission had been fulfilled, not only in finding his own healing but also in helping others find theirs. The owl, with its constant and silent presence, had been the catalyst for all of this, guiding and inspiring him every step of the way. But one afternoon, something unusual happened. After accompanying the priest on his usual walk around the parish, the owl perched on a nearby branch, as it often did. However, this time, instead of staying close, it spread its wings and, with a steady flight, headed toward the horizon, disappearing among the trees of the forest. Father Antonio stood still for a moment, watching the owl depart. It was the first time it had left without immediately returning. In the days that followed, the bird did not come back. Initially, the priest felt a pang of sadness, as if he were losing an old friend. But as time passed, he began to understand the true meaning of that departure. The owl had fulfilled its mission by his side. It had been there during his most difficult moments, as a symbol of the divine presence and the spiritual connection with those who had left this world. Now it had gone to fulfill another purpose, perhaps beside another soul who needed its presence and silent comfort. The community also felt the absence of the owl, but its legacy remained alive. People began to look at the small things around them with greater meaning, believing that, like the owl, every living being, every event carried within it a greater purpose. Father Antonio, for his part, continued his work at the parish with renewed conviction. The memories of his brother still accompanied him, but in a different way. There was no longer the overwhelming pain that once dominated his thoughts, but rather a profound sense of peace, as if he knew his brother was by his side, guiding him, just as the owl had done. Over time, life in the community returned to its usual rhythm, but no one ever forgot the owl and the role it had played in the lives of all who had witnessed its presence. Father Antonio, now at peace with his past, continued to serve his community, guided by the certainty that, like the owl, each of us is here for a greater purpose. He understood that, just as the owl had appeared and departed at the perfect moment, life is made up of cycles, and each of us has a role to play. The final Mass he celebrated before leaving for the spiritual retreat was one of the most moving. He bid the community a temporary farewell, certain that even in his absence, the love and connection they shared would continue to thrive. During the celebration, many parishioners looked to the sky as if hoping to see the owl one last time, but it did not appear. Even so, the spirit of hope and healing that the owl had left behind was present in the heart of every person there. As the priest left the church at the end of the Mass, he felt a gentle breeze brush against his face, and for a brief moment, he had the distinct impression of hearing the soft beat of wings. A smile formed on his lips, and he looked up to the clear and serene sky, feeling fully connected to something far greater. He knew that, wherever it was, the owl had fulfilled its purpose, just as he had fulfilled his own. The final message from the owl and from Father Antonio was clear. Love, healing, and the presence of those we love never disappear. They can manifest in unexpected ways, whether through an owl that appears from nowhere, a kind gesture, or a simple moment of silence. It is in these moments that we find comfort, hope, and strength to move forward. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can continue exploring and celebrating stories that connect and inspire us. Thank you, and see you next time.